What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I'm feeling like 100 grand.
You are listening to Inspired Insider with your host, Dr. Jeremy Weisz.
Dr. Jeremy Weisz here, founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders. And this is going to be a treat. We have Ryan Tansom of Arkonaio. And Ryan, I always like to mention other episodes people should check out of the podcast. And you know some of these people. John Warlow, who wrote Built to Sell, which was ranked on Forbes and other platforms, one of the top business books. You could actually check out his podcast. I interview him on his podcast on Built to Sell Intel. Once a month or 2 months, talking about the previous month's episode. So check it out. You should, we do a webinar, actually live webinar, so you can come ask questions. If you sign up on Built to Sell, you'll be invited to the webinar and you can ask your questions live to John. So check it out. Joe Valley, partner at Quiet Light Brokerage. He talked about the Exitpreneurs Playbook. All this relates to Ryan Tansom's advice and expertise. So these are very relevant. And Todd Taskey talks about the most valuable advice when selling your agency. He also has the Second Bite podcast. And of course, a shout out to Kellyanne Fidio and Paul Miller that run Amazing Exits podcast. And Ryan Tansom was a guest on that one as well. And this episode is brought to you by Rise 25. And at Rise 25, we help businesses give to and connect to their Dream 100 relationships and partnerships. And we do that by helping you run your podcast. Ryan has a podcast. You got to check it out. It's Intentional Growth, Ryan. And it is great. He's done many episodes. And for me, Ryan, the number one thing in my life is relationships. I'm always looking at ways to give to my best relationships. And I've found no better way over the past decade to profile the people and the companies I respect and admire and have them on my platform to, inform everyone else. So if you've thought about podcasting, you should. And if you have questions, go to rise25.com. Both John and I, my business partner, have been doing it for over a decade now. So, and thank you for Tom Varanas, who over the past 15 years helped companies grow and succeed. He introduced Ryan and I. We have a lot of mutual connections. So check out what Tom is doing. And without further ado, Ryan Tansom started his entrepreneurial career at his family business, where he was responsible for the strategic, operational, and financial strategy of the $21 million company. And Ryan helped turn the company around and bring intentional focus to the right strategies, which actually enabled them to sell for 8 figures to a local competitor. And Ryan started Arkonaio and created the intentional growth framework and the podcast. He has amazing guests like Tom Stewart and many more. And they help owners grow the value of their company with the end in mind through their training and the fractional CFO services. So Ryan, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Jeremy. This is going to be fun.
There's so much to ask. And I wanted to start with, when you went into the family business, you had to turn it around. And so I want to just give people a brief overview. I know you've told the story many times about the family business, but I want to hear when you went into the business, what did you do to turn it around?
So the business was, we sold copiers and did managed IT services and document management for the context. And my dad started it by mortgaging our house and buying a $250,000 worth of used Panasonic copiers so he built it from the ground up. And when he grew the business, we grew up to 21 million. And so right around the financial crisis, Jeremy, I had the choice of, hey, there was not a lot of options at that point. So I started at the family business and he was very distant from the company. He had hired a GM and it was just kind of off and running. And he'd gone through a bunch of personal stuff. So when I started, I had this 8-month bliss where I was like, hey, just go be a salesperson, work hard, make sure that you're not the entitled family member that everybody thinks you are. And then I started joining the bank and the CPA meetings at the early age of 22 and realizing that the financial crisis hit us just like everybody else. So the margins of the equipment just poof, gone. So cash flow became an issue. So literally every 2 weeks, trying to hit that $250,000 payroll every Thursday for the wire, while reinvesting and changing things is what I meant by turning around. So we can talk plenty about that if you want, but over the next 6 years, it was new accounting systems, people, processes, strategies, all that kind of stuff.
I want to, pause on the salesperson thing. When I think of hardcore, I think door-to-door sales, I think copy. I mean, even Sarah Blakely talks about, she got started doing sales.
Faxes, man.
Faxes.
Yeah.
So tell me and again, selling is, relevant to what everyone does. Walk me through what that looked like. You would you cold call? Would you go in person? How did the sales work?
And then I'll do that. And then I'll tie back to even what you guys do at Rise 25 and building relationships. It's building a relationship, Jeremy. When I started, it was, first of all, that was back when you had to wear a suit to sell a copier, but it was, hey, by the way, here's your zip codes and here's a list of customers, maybe or maybe not, that are customers. And it was literally just get your business cards and go knock on doors. And no joke, Jeremy, I was 19 doing my internship. And I went straight to the tallest tower in Minneapolis. And I was like, well, there's got to be a bunch of businesses in there. And someone said, hey, what you got to do is you got to make sure that the security guard doesn't catch you. So you go up and you go to like level 22, then 16, then 17, then 4. And literally the security guard was like, finally, I opened up the elevator and then they were. I'm like, bummer, I got busted. But it's truly just starting the conversation. That is the entire point of sales.
What would you do? So you're like, great. Okay. And this puts hair on your chest. I mean, when you do cold calling or cold actually door to door, you'd go up. Okay. You go up in this building and you walk in. What do you say?
Oh my God. I don't even remember what I was saying back then. It was probably something so horrible. Like, hey, do you have any copiers in one of your leases up? That was how poor the messaging was. There was no Donald Miller story brand at that point. But it was really trying to figure out, like, when we had actually built out the right messaging, Jeremy, it was, where is your business going? So if it was a law firm, they want to bill more hours faster and growth. So our technology ended up supporting their abilities to bill more and grow. And like, regardless whether it was copiers or printers or faxes or managed IT services or AV or cloud hosting, all of those are supporting what they're supposed to be doing. Took me a while to figure out how to like lean in with like the story kind of the story approach. Back then it was probably, you got any copiers and what's your price? And I could probably undercut it by 10%.
I mean, you are figuring out, do they have a need, but now it's more relational selling. You're basically serving the benefit, kind of putting the benefits on a platter as opposed to the features of whatever you're selling.
Trying to listen to people like, well, hey, what are your actual problems? Like, yes, you have these things called copiers, devices, or IT service, but like they wake up, they're not thinking about that stuff. It's, hey, the Minnesota Wild was a client of ours, and it was keep everything going so we can host the Stanley Cup and we can keep getting butts and seats to sell more tickets to, sell more promotions. Like understanding what are their goals and then how is what you're doing going to help them get to where they want to go.
So you went to turn around the company. And you said you would revamp all of the systems. So break down for me a little about what did you start to repair?
Well, the first was we didn't have the right financing, Jeremy, and there's a whole long conversation behind that. But the wrong kind of capital structure from the line of credit and the banking and all that stuff. I'm going to put a pin in that and put that over there because that's one component. But then the operations, is understanding how to create more sustainable, predictable, and transferable cash flow, which we did not have. And we needed that in order to then hire the right people and implement the right strategies. So it starts with, hey, what do we need to be in the marketplace to compete? And it was no longer just copiers. The IT providers and the cloud hosting providers and software providers are coming in town, the telecom. So it was understanding that strategic plan, how we were engaging that conversation and helping clients, and then saying, how can we profitably do those things for the right types of clients? Then it's revamping compensation plans with the salespeople to align with our long-term goals. And then it was the systems, like the accounting systems and the ERP systems, and then the people. We have the right people and the Jim Collins people on the bus. We had a long list of people that were on the wrong bus and in the wrong seat. So it was like trying to take the strategies, the operations, and the people and align that to where do we want to be as a business. And so within that, there was a lot of, challenges, and there was no framework to think about it back then. It was really out of gut feel of what we thought was right.
Yeah. And I want to talk about the framework a little bit. I know you have 5 different principles that you talk about, but I thought this would be instructive because some people listening may be experiencing this and they're like, Ryan, I want to turn this around, or even if it's going well, I want to do even better. So talk about the principles a little bit.
Will do. And Jeremy, the principles came out of all these topics, valuations, exits, investment banking, private equity, and finance, strategic planning. It's just like this huge cluttered mess of chaos. And it's like, how do we think about this stuff? And Jeremy, when I came out and we sold the business in 2014, I realized that, you've got EOS and Traction and a big, huge fan, and then scaling up with the Rockefeller Habits and Vern Hardish or the strategic coach, you name these different systems and processes. It was like, you know what? The big thing that I realized, Jeremy, was they all assume that the business owner knows what they want from their business and why, and how to go get it and what creates value. So what we decided to do, and I was like, I just want to help people think about how all of these variables interact, but not tell them what to do, because I never wanted someone to tell me what to do. So these 5 principles, Jeremy, came out of that desire to help you and others think about what they want and then how to actually put a game plan into place, knowing that everybody's different. So the 5 principles, and they go in order, because you can't take one of them out because then they don't work. And that's when I think about the word framework versus some other word choices, a framework it's a decisions that we know that the decisions might be different every day. So Dalio's got his his whole framework on the economy. There's so many different outcomes, and that's what this is. So the first principle is called your drivers. What do you want from the business and why? Truly, the amount of people that haven't really thought through that. Is it legacy? Is it disrupt an industry? Is it community? Is it family harmony? Is it, your lifestyle and how much you enjoy leadership or strategic planning? No one should care except you. So writing that down is important. That'll lend us insight on principle 2, which is your financial targets. There are 3 of them. One is your target annual income, cash flow for you personally, regardless of whether you have that business. So let's say I'm just making something up, 120 grand, 10 grand a month, regardless of whether you have the business. So it might be a salary and distributions and perks right now, but how do you maintain that no matter what? The second target is your target net worth, because your net worth impacts the decisions that you have with the business, right? If you're worth a bunch of money, you can just fold it up if you want. The third financial target is the value of your business. Understanding what creates that value and how much you would walk away with if you sold at any given point just gives you context, Jeremy, to say, this is what it's all worth right now, and what does it need to be worth? And then I'll keep at the pace here. So principle 3 is exit options. There are 5 of them that we bucketed them into. One is internal partnerships, management, and family. Second one is acquisition entrepreneur, Walker Diable. You've mentioned Joe Valley, that whole world of search funds. Third one is ESOPs, employee stock ownership plans. The fourth one is private equity. And the 5th one is strategic buyers. You can go public. That's not a place that we spend a lot of time in, but every one of those for cash flowing businesses, each one of those options, Jeremy, will impact when you get your money, how you get your money, and your role post closing. So understanding your ownership role as this equity of this asset is different than your management role, which is the wages that you get for the job that you do. They're completely different out of all those. And then I'll come up with this case study when we're done, if you want, is understanding what you want out of both of those. Then you can say, here's what I want. Here are my financial targets. Now let's grow to create these choices. Leads us to the 4th principle, which is grow enterprise value by creating sustainable, predictable, and transferable cash flow. The more sustainable and predictable and transferable your cash flow is, the more enterprise value you have, the more your multiple is, and the higher the enterprise value, which gives you choices, honestly, to be able to do what you want. And then the 5th one is your team of advisors, and you can go take your goals to them and help them optimize your plan instead of them wondering what you want from the business.
Speak to the team of advisors for a second and who people should have on their team of advisors.
When I say team of advisors, these are the outside people. So not like the consultants inside the operation. So if you're hiring an EOS implementer, not necessarily referring to them. These are people that, like your wealth manager, your CPA that helps on your personal and in your profession, and the company taxes. You got investment bankers, you got bankers, you got insurance, all these things that, if you think about truly, if you're running your business like a private equity firm, like, hey, this is an asset, or like almost like a family office would, how do we wrap the estate plan, the financial plan, and everything around this asset so that way I can continue growing it and having as many choices I want? They optimize what you want. Not one of our advisors knew what my dad and I wanted, Jeremy, because we didn't know. Right. So like they're sitting there throwing out technical solutions like, well, that sounds like an awesome tax plan. And then my dad and I will walk out of a meeting like, what does that mean to us? I don't know. Should we just go sell more copiers? Sure. So it's like, it's like the general contractor that has a blueprint and a budget. And then all the people optimize based on the blueprint and the budget.
You talk about this a little bit on your podcast, and people should check out Intentional Growth. About someone replacing themselves in the position to make it more sellable. So you give an example. Let's say someone's making whatever $200,000. You said, well, you can hire someone to do your job, right, for whatever $150,000, and you can step out of that. So I'd love for you to hear. Sometimes it's hard to give up, relinquish control, and you've seen a lot of different cases. And I wonder, what's your advice to someone? You see this from the outside looking in, saying, listen, you could replace yourself. What are some of the thoughts and questions that you would ask that person to have them think about? Do you want to actually, or should you have someone come in and replace you or not?
So yeah, I'll absolutely go. I don't want to step back for a second. What are the challenges, Jeremy, with that? Because we hear this all the time. I speak to CEO peer groups like EO and Visage all the time. I got the podcast. And like the thing is, I hear well, just hire someone to replace yourself. Okay, let's ask a couple more questions on just that concept that we're constantly telling each other as business owners. First of all, can you afford it? So like when I look at the numbers in our CFO business, like the amount of people that end up hitting like the $2 million mark, depending on your business model and how cash comes in and out, like you might say, I'm finally making 150 grand. And then this consultant comes in and says, Jeremy, just replace yourself. You're like, dude, with what money? Like, yes, would I love to sit at home making 150 grand instead of working? Of course. Can I? No. So the goal is to say, if you truly want to replace yourself, go back to principle 2 and say, what's my target annual income? So you say, okay, if I want to make 200 grand, I need to build the cash flow of this company up enough so I can get the distributions consistently at the 200 grand and afford that person. So when I hear I hit the ceiling or we can't do this, it's almost always a money thing because you have to understand how those decisions are getting made. So going back to then your question about control, I think a lot of times the money is one of the big, huge factors, and that's behind the I can't because, and no one's really talking about it. Then there's the second part of the ego. Like, I mean, I've got like huge companies that we've worked with. When I say huge, but huge privately held companies where the owner, by the time they get to this point where they got the strategic plan, they got the financial plan that's tied to the strategic plan to grow value, they hire a president, and then they go in there and they still screw a bunch of shit up because they want to be the person that everybody goes to because they're needed. So this goes back to principle 1, which is if one of your love languages is affirmation, just acknowledge it, right? Like, hey, I love to be needed, and just acknowledge it and make sure your role within the organization is still feeling your personal needs. So I think it's just really coming down to like, what does it mean? Like, what do you actually want from this? And then we can start solving for the things that you want.
Ryan, back in 2014, when you sold the company, what were you intending to do after you sold?
I didn't think about it once. Honestly, and this is so the reason that I have everything today, that the business and this podcast and all that stuff, is because I read Bo Burlingham's book, Finish Big, a month or 2 after we sold, Jeremy. And I was like, well, wouldn't that have been nice to read, like, I don't know, 4 months ago before I made the decision? And Bo's book, I mean, he interviewed like 300 business owners in like the Vistage small business world. And 75% of them were unhappy with their exit, regardless of how much money they made. And it was because they didn't know who they were, what they wanted from their business, and why. And I was like, well, check the box. That was me. The only person that Bo interviewed that didn't have that issue was like John Warlow, who he viewed it as a financial asset, who's also been on my show, right? So you get this, like, the common themes of all the people you and I have been talking about. So I read Bo's book and I was like, well, I'm in the 75% group of like, that sucked. I now don't have my baby. All my people that I used to hang out with are gone. I am not needed. So I went through that whole process, and it was just interesting because I realized that I was not alone. And it happens so much because people don't realize until after the fact what the business meant to them personally on a multidimensional, and in a multidimensional way.
Ryan, other favorite books that have influenced you? So you mentioned the Bo Burlingham, John Warlow. What other books do you recommend?
Oh my gosh, man, I'm an audiobook addict. So I'd say the ones that I like that I'd mentioned the most, one is Conscious Capitalism. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but like I like to do good and make money. And like, I think there's this kind of, capitalism crisis right now, and conscious capitalism shows how you can make a bunch of money and make a huge impact, which I really like. And right now, Ray Dalio's The Changing World Order, where if you're wondering what the heck's going on with our world and money, monetary policy and everything, as you can see, I like other frameworks on how to think, because I can't know all this stuff and none of us can. And sometimes the anxiety builds. Like, should I read that? Should I digest that content? But if you understand a framework, then it's easy to say yes or no to what you should be focusing on.
I could see you right after the sale going in a million different directions. Why Arkona and fractional CFO?
When I was sitting in a management meeting after we had sold, Jeremy, and there was 11 mid managers at this company, and I got out of that meeting and I was like, oh my God, I am not meant to be an employee. Because before I'd have an idea on the, from the gym on the way to work, and then I would implement it by noon. And now I'm sitting in a committee of 11. No one has any responsibilities technically. And then I'm just like, holy cow. And I watched, it was an integration meeting where I watched people dismantling the baby that I had. And it was just this like, what the heck is going on? I'm sitting in a cube next to an intern after running a $20 million company at the age of 26. And I'm going, this is not exactly how I wanted any of this to unfold, which kind of go back to your earlier question. A lot of, I wish I would have, and I don't regret anything now, but it was, I don't want anybody else to regret some of the biggest decisions that they have. And it's like the red pill in the matrix. Like, if you can see the zeros and ones, I think every entrepreneur or business owner that I've ever met, Jeremy, we have a level of self-responsibility and ideas that we're willing to fail to better understand ourselves and understand who we are. And by reflecting, then we can make our own choices. And so my goal was, with the training, that was the first business that we created, I don't care what you do, Jeremy, but here's how it all works. And so choose your own adventure. But it's kind of like gravity. You can choose not to believe in it, but if you jump off the roof of your building, it's gonna be there. So like, you might as well know how it all works. We didn't invent any of this, Jeremy. It just organized it in a way that allowed people to, take the red pill in the matrix. And then the fractional CFO services came from, after hundreds of people coming through our training, looking at the module and principle 4 about finances and how it helps grow value. And they were like, we don't have any of this information. So it was almost one of those things where we couldn't ignore it at that point because so many people were asking us, and then realizing that the numbers was the clear, tangible path, right? Because you could take the Value Builder System score, which is amazing. But then the next question is, what do I do with that? Now that I know what I want or where I want to go, how do I actually get from here to there and be able to measure my progress so I know if I'm on track or off track? And the numbers became a unbelievably clear black and white way to see that.
I'm going to come back to what you said. I want you to paint the picture about what you mean by dismantle, so people kind of understand what happened at the end. But before we do, talk about what was resonating with your training. Why were people taking the training?
You ever been in one of those meetings in your business where you're like, we've had this conversation 14 times. I'm getting frustrated. I'm using your partner, John. Me and John are like in disagreement, but we don't know what reality is. And we're trying to get to somewhere. We're not sure if our visions are aligned. We've got this shared company that's our shared asset. I'm just frustrated. I feel like it's on Groundhog's Day. And I don't feel like
Have you been listening in on our conversations? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, right.
John and I fight like a married couple. It's fine.
And same thing with our partners. And that's what. But when you can do that with love, it's way easier than if it's out of, fear and tension. And the reality is, Jeremy, is that a lot of people, there's 3 things that we think that every business owner wants. And if they're all working, magic happens. Create wealth, enjoy work, and make an impact. And if one of those is missing, Jeremy, and out of the hundreds of podcast interviews I've had, that's when I see like kind of the emptiness, or someone wants something more. It's that yearning for something else. Where if you could be making a lot of money and having a lot of fun, the next question you say, well, what's all this for? You could be making a huge impact, having a lot of fun. You're like, man, I'm broke. I got to do something about this. So you start to like play with those 3 things. And the goal, and we say intentional growth is in the middle of there, where you're constantly having fun. You're enjoying the journey and the progress towards that. And then so when you say what's resonating, And it's how we package it, but then we've ran businesses, Jeremy. I mean, I love so many advisors, but I mean, at the conference I was at last week, a CPA goes up there and is telling people what to do. And I don't know, man, I started my business because I don't like to be told what to do. I want to be told here's how the game works. You choose the plays, you choose the team, you choose the sport, but and so I think it's the combination, here's how it all works. We've been there, done that. And here's, some examples of what went this way versus that way. So I think it's I don't know, we're not selling anything. It's just education for the most part.
And there's a cautionary tale, when you say dismantle. So I want you to unpack that a little bit when you sold your business.
So I'll go back to what was I doing in the business? And so as I was hiring the people, so tapping into my network of college friends or all my community, building the employees for the vision that I wanted to be this business to business technology provider. I mean, we won things like Minnesota Wild and some big accounts. We were shaking up the industry where example on the Minnesota Wild is 330 employees. We had packaged up copiers, print centers, on-site staff, and we had a cloud hosting provider. We had a co-location data center with them and a combined shared IT help desk with them, all boiled in on a price per user, bank finance locked in contract for 5 years. It was so innovative for how it was all packaged, how easy it was for them to purchase that. That took me 4 years and millions of dollars and so many headaches to build that offering up, to be to be a pioneer in that space. The revenue percentage of coming from IT service is way low in proportion to the copier sales and the copier maintenance, but it was built through blood, sweat, and tears and a lot of challenges and a lot of miserable nights. And when I sat down with the buyer, which great buyer, and honestly, they've been amazing to all of our people for the last 8 years that they brought on. They had a different vision for what that space was going to do and how they delivered the services. So they were more optimizing for equipment at that point. They've evolved since then, but it was just, so when they got there, they didn't really know how to value, not on a financial term, Jeremy, but they didn't know what it was that I had built. And it was no, I don't care what you do with it. Just don't shut off the server. We just spent millions of dollars and years building that. My team got put onto different teams. They shut down the server. Everybody had to use their systems. And then the new service model was different. So it was this alignment of who we are with the business, how our strategies are, and the vision for our culture. It's not like the buyer was wrong at all. It was just, I didn't know that this was going to be a thing. So when I sat in that integration meeting and it was shut that server off, Paul's going to go there, Brian's going to go there, Scott's going to go there. And I'm like, oh no, the wire had already come through and it was all done. I just didn't know what that was going to be like in that circumstance.
That paints a picture of dismantling for sure. Because they had a different vision. It's a different vision. And I was talking with John Worrell the other week, and we were talking about non-negotiables because there was someone who had specifically 4 non-negotiables. So I'm going back to your younger self. What non-negotiables would you have maybe had at that time when you were going to sell your company?
It's hard because the nature of the exit we chose wouldn't have been able to allow most of my non-negotiables, Jeremy, which is why I wouldn't have chose the route I chose. So that comes back to I wish I would have. And again, I love my life now. So I don't want to, life is a life of journey, and life is a journey of learning. So I learned, now I have a different view on life. So I don't want to replace that, but it would have had a different set of choices I would have considered based on what I wanted. And so to directly answer your question, I had a vision for what I wanted our business to be in the marketplace. I had a culture. I read the Zappos Delivering Happiness book, and that's the culture I integrated. And I didn't want to fire anybody. I was changing people's lives using the business, like sending people to grad school, whatever it was. So I was using the business as a vehicle to do good. And that vehicle was gone after we sold. And so it was more of, and then there was the IT services, how we were doing that. So to directly answer your question, to be intentional with this, you have to take principle 1, write everything that you want down. Then make sure that you do everything you can do to keep it. And by growing a more valuable business, you're going to be able to tell people, no, that I don't want to sell, or no, I don't want to take that finance. You take control. If you decided to sell to a third party, you can say, Jeremy, here's everything I want and why. And if you don't want it, I'm not selling to you. And so in the earnout agreement, in the purchase agreement, in the LOI, every step of the way, you're outlining everything you want and why. And if they don't do it, then you have all the recourses in there. But because it's a blank slate, Jeremy, it's hard because it's not like, oh, I filled out those 4 check boxes and not those 4. It's literally specific to each seller. What do they want? And writing it down and making sure it's mandatory as part of the exchange.
I could see, Ryan, in Arkona, there was an evolution, right? Started off with the training and the framework. And then people were demanding other things of you and the company. They wanted to get their financials in order. So I wanted to walk people through a little bit of an example. There was one person, they had a company for 30 years, 70 staff. Tell me about that.
So this manufacturer, 30 years, very devoted to their culture, their legacy, because this gentleman actually had sent 60 people through Tony Robbins and Unleash the Power Within and their spouses. So not cheap, man. So that obviously he cares about his people. And he had 2 family members in the business, 2 out of the business. So he goes through the training. We already touched on the 5 principles. So I'm going to talk about the epiphanies, Jeremy. He said, well, I want options. And going through your training, I now realize that my wealth manager just arbitrarily put $7 million as the value of my business on my personal statement and said, yeah, you're financially free. Now I realize that, I'll give you some specifics here. On 14 million in revenue, he was doing about 1.1 or 1.2 million in EBITDA, normalized EBITDA, which is essentially just a proxy for cash flow. His market and his value was, you times it by 5. It was worth about $5.5 million enterprise value, which is top line. Then you have to pay your debts and keep your cash. Then you have your equity value. He pays some taxes. He'd only walk away with $2.5 million. And he's going, what? I'm 65. This is not, my wealth manager said I was financially free. I'm 5 million short. And if he wanted to maximize his financial targets, principle 2, he would have had to do the route that we did: sell to a local competitor, gut the company, sacrifice principle 1 drivers of legacy, his family, harm, all those things. He probably could have squeezed out a couple more $1 million with a synergistic sale. But he said no. So what he said is, I'm going to put some intentional focus now. I want to go from 1.1 million in EBITDA to 2 million. So I can go from a 5 multiple to 6. And then I can go from a $5.5 million valuation to 12. And then I'll net $8 million and I can do an ESOP and sell to my employees. And within the first year and a half, he'd already paid down $1.5 million in debt, started growing his EBITDA up. And when you have only so many resources, Jeremy, of your cash flow and your people and your time, making sure that whatever you're reinvesting back in and whatever strategy you're doing there's 3 things: growing your multiple by de-risking your cash flow, growing your EBITDA, and paying down debt. You pull all 3 of those levers at once, you're now in the private equity game, and wealth creation is absolutely possible and at an exponential rate that most people are not familiar with.
For people listening, Ryan, explain ESOP and where is a appropriate scenario that you think people should consider that?
So an ESOP stands for Employee Stock Ownership Plan. And essentially, I'll give you want me to do the 4-minute overview of just kind of how it works? Or essentially this trust buys the shares of your EIN number, your entity. And it's based on the financial value. So it's based on the risk of the cash flow. So you're not getting a lot of synergistic value there. But in that trust purchase, the employees are the beneficiaries of the trust. And so what happens is, one is when you sell to the ESOP trust, the entity becomes tax-free. Well, the entity, it's a pass-through. So literally you're not paying any state or federal taxes. So Minnesota here, if you got $1 million in EBITDA, you're no longer having to pay $300 to $350,000 in taxes. And therefore, Jeremy, a bank will usually give you 1/3 to 1/2 of the money up front. So they'll lend the company, in a $5 million sale, hypothetically, you might get $2 or $2.5 million up front. The seller has to carry a note for, call it 10%, which by the way, I don't know where anybody can get 10% return on something that they created at today's, interest rates. And it's all in control for the most part of the business owner. So if you focus on growing that intrinsic value, you can pre-engineer the value of that business and sell it to your employees. Your employees don't have to take any money out to buy it. And then at that point, Jeremy, this is where Jack Stack, you and I were talking about him. He did this with SRC, is the company then grows value and the employees are vesting in that based on the growth together. And so what I find interesting about an ESOP, Jeremy, is that even if you don't want this and you don't gravitate towards it, if you focus on the intrinsic value, you can always fall back on an SBA loan with an internal transfer. You're not hoping that some third party is going to come in and take your headaches away from you at a high purchase price. And what I think is also the last comment about ESOPs is like, I hate the words exit planning more than life itself. And I've got a 5-year journey of misery to explain to you why I don't think most business owners like it either. And it's because the reason that people don't do ESOPs, because if you called me up and said, hey, Ryan, I want out. I'd be like, Jeremy, out of what? Your job or the equity in the asset? And you would most likely look at me like I'm a Martian, because you've never been challenged like that. Because most people are like, what do you want? Because like in an ESOP, the example I just gave is you can reach in and liquidate your asset on the upwards of my partner did a very large ESOP and continue being the CEO and running the company for as long as you want. Jack Stack turned his company into an ESOP, personally made the wealth in the 80s. And now the company is he's got 1,600 employees, 100 million in cash, and he's created multimillionaires. But he wanted out of the financial asset, not out of his job. If you wanted out of your job, you might take the earlier route of grow the distributions big enough so you can hire a president and keep it. So I think just that's concept of like, what are you trying to optimize for? And then the ESOP specifically is just a way of, mechanically changing the ownership to the owner or to the seller where they can get the money. And then the employees don't have to pay any money because the tax-free nature of it is going to help with the transition.
So one reason someone wouldn't do it is they just want out of the business. Obviously, they're not going to do it if they just want out. What is another reason why?
Out of what? Right?
Out of their job, the position that they wanted.
Bingo, Jeremy. Because if you came to me and said, I want out, and then I asked the clarifying question. You're like, I'm burnt out. I don't like my job anymore. I'm very stressed. And then I looked at you and said, hey, if you actually wanted to do an ESOP, you're going to have to spend 5 years investing all your distributions back into the company and then doing all these hard things. Then you might get the ESOP after 5 years and you're going to look at me going, I just told you I was tired. So and that's where when someone wakes up and hears the word exit, now I'm ready. But then I say, by the way, you got 7 years of hard work to get what you want. That's a shame. Instead of saying growing value with intention to create choices. So when you're ready for a change, you get what you want. Does that make sense?
Yep. Is there anything else? I want to circle to another question in a second, but with that person who had the company for 30 years, 70 staff, is there anything else that we left out that you wanted to touch on?
When this concepts that we've been talking about, the asset versus the job, and people listening in, partners, family members, investors, there's a lot of people that are tied to companies. When you have this level of discussion, Jeremy, tensions and stress goes down because we're acknowledging here's how the game works, man. Okay, here's how the numbers work. Here's how the value works. What are you solving for, Jeremy? So if it's family members, so my point about this case study, 2 family members in the business, 2 out of the business, they're not trying to make things equal through payroll. It has to be fair, which is the people working in jobs in the company get paid. And then the family, the estate plan is in the estate plan and the company's asset is in the estate plan. So it just helps clarifying all this stuff. So that way people don't have to fight, man. It just doesn't have to be that hard.
So a business owner comes to you, CEO comes to you and says, Ryan, sign me up. I want in with Arkona. I need fractional CFO services. I imagine there's a lot of stuff you need to unravel, unwind. Where do you start the business owner?
So the intentional growth framework, we have 4 stages: learn, plan, grow, choose. Learn is the training. Everybody's got to go through the training because I think about my dad and I in the back. We don't, back when we had the company, Jeremy, we don't want to work with someone that doesn't know the difference between working capital and their personal piggy bank. Because again, where are you going, Jeremy? Like, what are we trying to do? We want to help you think through that. So the training is step one. Plan is where we build this financial model, and we've got a financial assessment on the website that people can go in and take. But really understanding how to tie all three financial statements together and then project them out into the future allows you to see, like, literally, if you tie all three of those together, you can see the value of your business 5 years out based on what you're trying to do. And that becomes the roadmap. And so that's the plan phase. And then the fractional CFO services, we kind of leverage the exposure that EOS has had and all these systems where our CFOs are not consultants. They go in there and integrate on the management team meetings. So like they're running these companies with these business owners. So on the weekly meetings, and they've got people internally reporting to them, working with the banks and the CPAs, and it's an hourly rate. And our goal is like, hey, about 30 hours a month, is pretty much the normal deal, no contracts. And think about it as like a trainer, Jeremy. If you hired a trainer right now, I'd say, okay, here's how all these exercises work. Here's how all this stuff works. What are your goals? And then let's put a plan in for you. If you don't want to be an Olympic athlete, let's not build a plan for that. You know what I mean? Like, so it's really just trying to, what you learned, it gives the insights to the plan that we're going to create.
Yeah. I mean, there's also an accountability piece in there too, right? I mean, you're building a plan, but now they're accountable to the CFO, your company, to do that. I mean, that's one of the things that attracts me to a trainer is they make me show up and do the work. I mean, I may do the work, right? Go ahead.
Well, as I say, like, accountable to what you said. Your trainer holds you accountable to your goals, not their goals for you, right? Like in the good trainers, by the way, let's say you had all these goals and you walked into the gym for our session and you were smoking a cig, eating a Big Mac at 7 a.m. and you had all these goals. But Jeremy, dude, what are you doing? Like, I don't care. I'm not smoking the cig or eating the Big Macs, but like, come on, man, you got these goals. Like, are we going to get closer or farther away? And so it's the accountability to yourself. And that's why the training is so fun, because I want people to want something and us to help them get there. Not, like I said, man, no one started their business to be told what to do. You're taking all this crazy risk so that way you don't have to be told what to do.
Yeah. I mean, as I get older, my goals are like not to get injured and they get less, but yeah. So learn, plan, grow. What was the fourth?
Choose. And essentially that's just whatever point in time down the road where you wake up and you say, I want something different. Oh, guess what? You don't have to sacrifice anything because you focus on growing value and you've got choices.
Yeah. My goal is to do the Murph in May. If anyone knows what the Murph is,
I don't know
with cross training. The 100 pull-up or 1 mile run, 100 pull-ups, 200 push-ups, 300 squats, and then another mile run in a 20-pound weighted vest. So I may skip the 20-pound weighted vest and go with the 10-pound weighted vest, but when I started, I could maybe do 1 pull-up, so that I'm not upper body. Awesome. You could probably do it like in a month. I could say. I've
got this picture based on that story I told earlier of that picture of Vince in Old School where he's doing the rings with the cig in his mouth. Like I did it.
Tell people, where can they look at that? You were mentioning a financial assessment. Where can they find that?
Arkonaio. Underneath resources is the financial assessment. And it's 23 questions. You don't need your financials. And it's just judging people on how well they're doing on the 4 components of a financial package. And then on the results page, Pat and I, my partner, who was a CFO for 35 years, did a bunch of M&A, and we walk through what good looks like. Because I think it's one of those things like, what is this supposed to look like? It's actually a knowable thing.
One last question, Ryan. First of all, I want to thank you for sharing your stories, your lessons. I want to encourage people to go to Arkona.io. That's ARKONA.io. Last question. And people can check out your podcast as well as Intentional Growth. And I'd love to hear some of your favorite episodes and maybe some of the lessons you learned from some of the podcast guests.
On the podcast page on the website too, I've got the most downloaded and favorite episodes. I would think, John Warlow has been great on the show. Bo Burlingham is on that landing page too. And he's so calming, Jeremy, of like, hey, you just need to figure out what you want. And it's pretty great. There's another one on there. It was Sonny Vanderbeck. Him and I completely dissect private equity. Jeremy, we're like, and there's another one on ESOPs, but the one on private equity is Sonny. He's got a conscious capitalism based private equity firm. So we're walking through and dissecting for an hour how it all works. And I think it's pretty powerful because, there's a lot of people getting out of the blue offers these days. So going through that is enlightening. And I like them all. Probably you probably got the same thing. Everybody's got a different flavor and a different taste. So it's hard to judge.
So everyone check out Arkonaio. Check out Intentional Growth. And Ryan, thanks so much.
Jeremy, thank you so much for having me.
What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I'm feeling like 100 grand.